further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Rob, who's going to, let us know his story, where he's from. But just basically, he calls himself a spatial storyteller. So I would really like to give you the floor and see if you can explain what that means to our audience. Thanks, Robert.
It's always the way, isn't it? There we go. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, all good.
Yes. Okay, fantastic. Right. Thank you so much to the rest of the panel. Thank you so much for having me. It's an exciting conversation for me. I want to start by actually reiterating the questions that were asked on the write-up for this event, which you might have read, and that might be why you're here. What happens to personal data and privacy if smart glasses become part of everyday life? And how does the ability to digitally alter or enhance our surroundings shape identity, trust, social interaction? And I think more personally, how does the ability to digitally alter or enhance appearance or the appearance of other people, how does that influence identity, trust, social interaction? I'm just checking whether I can move forward. Yes. Okay, great. Fantastic. So how does this ability, this new ability that is entering the marketplace right now, the ability to digitally alter our own appearance or the appearance of other people, how's that going to influence our sense of identity, our trust, our social interaction? So I've been banging on about questions like these for the best part of a decade. For most of that time, they seemed like basically science fiction kind of questions. Now, not so much. I've been evangelist for VR and augmented reality for a really long time. I've seen the buzzwords rise and fall. I've seen every high and low of the hype cycle. And for me, the last year has been incredibly exciting because we're seeing ideas that were once abstract and theoretical and the stuff of sci-fi become practical consumer products. Ideas like individuals might be able to place digital graphics contextually into their immediate reality. And from there, that individuals might have the ability to graphically customize a personal version of reality, whatever that means to them. Now, as a storyteller, I'm incredibly excited by these capabilities that are exploding right now, but that explosion also means that some of the ethical questions around this technology, which until recently were also basically purely theoretical, have also just become extremely real and extremely relevant. So let's get this video playing, give that a second. Because the thing is, this technology is a two-way street. It will enable you to have an interface and a status window for your daily life, the way that you do in a video game. It'll enable you to customize how you experience reality to a certain extent. And when you combine that with the kinds of AI technologies that we're seeing right now, technologies which allow individuals to remap or reimagine the visuals of their own body. I'm not sure if this video is playing okay. If not, I'll stick it in the chat so you can see it later. I'm just going to reload that. Thing is, this technology allows people to revisualize the way that they see themselves and potentially how other people see them as well. Yeah, I can see the video. It's a bit choppy. I'll put a link in after this. But it's also going to give the companies who make this technology a new window into your reality in ways that those companies are then going to figure out how to monetize. And it's also going to allow people to live within AI-styled versions of reality to a certain extent, maybe to inhabit AI-styled versions of themselves and to see AI-styled versions of other people. Now, I'm not going to talk so much about privacy. I'm going to leave that to the more qualified people on the panel. I want very briefly to give you an example of how these perception augmenting technologies might alter the way that we relate to each other. Specifically, I want to look at augmenting graphics onto human bodies. So I'm Rob. I'm a writer, an XR experience designer, and a spatial storyteller, whatever that is. I've helped create augmented reality experiences everywhere from PlayStation to the National Gallery. I'm a story person. I'm a narrative designer. And I've spent my whole career, nearly 15 years, figuring out how to use new technology to tell classic kinds of stories. And most stories, to one extent or another, deal with the conflict between the way we see ourselves, the way that other people see us, and the way that we want other people to see us. If anyone can pick this movie out, well done. It's a classic. The good news is that augmented reality is about to unlock all these unbelievably exciting new ways to digitally dress yourself and to dress other people, to unlock the ability to digitally customize your appearance the way that you can in a video game. Fantastic. But today, I also want to highlight how the reality-altering capabilities of this technology, XR plus AI, that might have a massive impact, not just on how we see ourselves, but how we present our identity to the world, and on how other people see our chosen identities, or whether they see our chosen identities at all. What happens when reality itself becomes digitally mediated? One answer, I think, is that we will need media literacy to navigate reality.
A long time ago at Lady Winterbottom's lovely tea party, which is
in the smoking ruins of...
It's a terrible soundtrack to this video. What happens when reality itself becomes digitally mediated? Can you see this video okay, or is it a black screen?
Yeah, it was a black screen and now it's unfortunately a little bit glitchy, but there's some stuff coming up.
I'll post the links after this so people can examine it. Basically, this is an AI restyler that's being used to take footage of a real person and to apply AI aesthetic filters over the top of it. Not unlike what many of you have done with ChatGPT or other similar programs, but being done in real time over live footage of the world. There's another piece of footage that I'll show you in a second, which is a video that's very much worth looking up. But yeah, I'll place a link because obviously connection-wise it's not working properly. All right, let's go back to this thing. What happens when reality itself becomes digitally mediated? We're here to talk about media literacy. I think that when reality becomes digitally mediated, even more so than it is today, we'll need media literacy to navigate reality itself, even more so than we already do. What happens, though, when identity itself becomes digitally mediated? When some people, those who opt into the technology, those who can afford the technology, are able to digitally reskin themselves? And what happens when identity is digitally mediated for some people and not others, because lots of people will be excluded from these digital systems because they can't afford it? What about if some people have a chosen identity which they want to digitally transmit to other people, but other people can opt out of seeing their digital identity, or even overwrite it or overpaint it with a digital identity altogether? I think that as AI-powered XR technology becomes widespread among wealthy users who can afford the technology, we're going to need the literacy to understand that the way we see someone else might not be the way that they see themselves. That however we choose to dress ourselves, whatever we physically put on our body in the morning, or however we choose to digitally dress ourselves, we may lose control of how others see us altogether. Others may be able to choose to reskin us with whatever graphics they choose. And even those people who opt out of this system altogether, who never buy headsets or glasses or any of these systems, never put on a pair of glasses at all, still, those people will need the literacy to understand that they might be subject to other people's augmented gaze, that they might be being graphically overwritten and reskinned in the privacy of someone else's headset. And I think this is going to have profound impact on how we interact with one another, especially the first generation who are digitally native to a world where reality itself increasingly is customizable and opt-in. Now, when planning this panel, we decided to use the example of a school. Now, I grew up wearing school uniform, which was normal in the north of England. It marked us out as students in our small town. It probably had a positive psychological effect on how we approach school. And it was a great leveler because families like mine didn't need to worry about not being able to afford branded clothing because everyone looked the same. Now, I'm not here to argue the merits or otherwise of school uniform, but I think it's a useful example of how reality is about to get a lot more weird. Because I want you to imagine a school in which some students, the kids who can afford it, walk around wearing AI-powered smart glasses, which can reimagine the school, reimagine their fellow students with graphical reskins mapped to their bodies in real time. What you're seeing on the screen, jumping choppily around, these are not animations. Those are digital costumes being mapped onto real bodies in real time by Snapchat, being worn or puppeted by those bodies in real time. It seems sci-fi to think that you might walk around a school and this is what people might be wearing in the halls, but within 5-6 years or so, those who are able to afford the technology, the kind of AI-powered XR glasses, which Meta and Google and Apple and Samsung and Snap are all developing right now, People with that technology will probably be able to select a digital outfit or avatar for themselves as easily as they can in a game and walk down the street with that digital outfit mapped to their body. So whether or not your school has a dress code within the privacy of their headsets, kids might be able to put on whatever they want. But they will also be able to do this to other people. I'm just going to step to the next tab and see if this video will play properly. If not, again, I will post a link and you can watch it yourselves, because this, I think, this video is a glimpse of the future. It's a video of a person wearing a Quest 3 headset. They're moving around their own flat, and an AI aesthetic filter is applying different aesthetic filters to the real environments of their flat as they move around it. So now we're in kind of beach mode. They're carrying a cup of coffee over to another person in the flat, perhaps a partner or a roommate. And hopefully you can see on the screen that person, the other occupant of this flat, is being reskinned in real time with multiple different aesthetics, depending on the aesthetic that is being displayed through the headset. So this is showing us a demo, not just of an augmented reality application that allow us to reskin a real place with loads and loads of different theming, but also to reskin the people in that place with different theming. Now, the person in this image, in this footage, the other person, the other body, they wave and smile back at the camera, and it seems likely that they know what's going on and that they've consented to it, right? But the problem is there's no inherent way of being notified if this is being done to you. If someone else is choosing to reskin you in real time, there's no inherent way in augmented reality to be notified that that is happening. In a closed system like VR chat, you might be able to select an avatar and be very confident that that's what other people are going to see mapped to your body, because it's a closed system and they want people to buy the avatars. And so they're very incentivized to make sure that if you buy an avatar, that's what other people see. But even that system is a bit subjective, because if you have a less powerful VR rig, you might see a down-res version of someone else's avatar. So people have to be conscious to a certain extent that other people might be seeing slightly different versions of their chosen digital identity. But because of the way augmented reality works, there's no inherent notification and no guarantee that your digital appearance is seen by other people, because the technology is a two-way street. You can augment and be augmented, because XR works by detecting the physical surfaces of the world and then superimposing graphics onto those physical surfaces. So other people won't necessarily see your chosen version of yourself. So if you're the owner-operator of a physical human body and you take it out on the street, you might be about to lose all control over how you are seen by others. In fact, this technology might accelerate a phenomenon that's been happening, let's face it, to women and marginalized people for millennia, and make it start happening to everyone, losing control over your public image and being subject to the gaze of others. Because you could superimpose a new aesthetic or skin or outfit onto other people's bodies without their permission. And even if you're participating in the ecosystem wearing the same glasses, you may not be notified, because presumably users will have some degree of privacy over what goes on inside their own headsets. And yes, unfortunately, very quickly, I think that will include explicit image abuse, deepfake porn. Imagine being able to walk down the street in a world where anyone with a pair of glasses could be viewing an inferred nude mapped onto your body as you walk past them. Or maybe they'll simply erase you. If this is being done to you, do you have the right to be notified? And how much privacy does a user of augmented reality have over what appears in their headset? I think these are about to become some of the most pressing questions in media literacy, as reality itself becomes more and more mediated by technology. And I also think it's a leading edge in the debate over AI ethics, because pretty soon some people, not many, but some, will be able to choose to live literally within AI hallucinations. Hallucinations which may be very pervasive and persuasive. John Hanke, the CEO of Niantic, the company that made Pokemon Go, he's spoken about consumers having the right, not just the ability, but the right to theme the world however they choose, so you could view the world like it's Nintendo everywhere. Hanke's even talked about this as a consumer right, the right to have your own perspective on the world, and by extension, maybe the right of companies to sell you whatever version of the world you might be willing to pay for. But of course, all that time, the people who can afford the technology are running around in these augmented, bespoke versions of reality. The vast majority of people will be stuck unable to afford the technology, left in a potentially second-class, freemium, basic tier of reality, but still subject to the augmented gaze of others. And so I think media literacy has an incredibly vital role to play here, because our personal rights are about to include rights over ourselves as a piece of media, and our rights over our personal version of the world as a piece of media. Imagine the school we talked about earlier. How will students' attention be influenced by the ability to reskin what they see? What kinds of self-expression will become possible, but also what new kinds of bullying will become possible? And will we even be able to tell that it's happening? How will it feel to be a student in a school like this? And how will it feel to stand at the front of a classroom if you can't be sure which version of you the kids are seeing? So I want to leave you with two questions about reality rights. And again, I think that these are questions of rights and ethics, but also of media literacy, because reality itself is becoming manipulable, subjective media, personalized, on-demand media. So if reality is the medium and the medium is the message, and that message is algorithmically personalized to me, then reality can be whatever I want it to be, right? First question. Do you have the right to see the world the way you choose? And if so, how much? And second question, do you have the right to present yourself and to be seen in the way that you choose? To what extent do other people have the right to overwrite that? And just to leave you on a fun note, on the basis that we are about to, appearance, visuals, the visual appearance of the world is about to become very subjective, we decided to run the faces of all of our panelists through a Studio Ghibli filter, which you might have seen have become very popular as well. But just imagine that you might be standing at a bus stop and someone might choose to see you and the whole world through a Ghibli filter that makes everything seem kind of happy and optimistic. Doesn't sound so bad. But they might be standing next to somebody at that same bus stop who chooses to visualize the world entirely through some sort of fantasy kingdom with, black and white and unnerving ideology and ethics. That's where I want to leave it. Thank you very much for your time.
Amazing, Rob. Thank you very much for that. I also am happy to report Ahmed has made it. So thank you so much for coming to moderate the session. I hope everything was okay on the way to work, and that you are relaxed and can take over the next phase of the webinar.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yeah, things are good. Like things like are unexpected today, like these accident. But yeah, I'm good, and other people are good. Thank you so much. Thank you. So thank you everyone for joining today. And Rob, thank you so much for the presentation. And I attended like most of it. I was like 90% of it. So it's good. Also, one more thing, as you can see here on screen, this is like the book by Rob Morgan. I'm not done with it yet, but I can see like it's a very, very, very good book in terms of the topic that it covers, and it is really, really a great one. So I recommend, like, if you are into this field, please make sure that you are going to have a look at it, and it's really great. Rob, thank you so much. So please, just a reminder that if you look at the chat, you will find like the links are shared, and if like the speakers refer to these links, so they'll be there. So now I want to give the floor to Alina, and Alina, I would like you to introduce yourself, and then Alina is a really big contributor to this topic as well, and yep, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Ahmed. Thanks, Rob, for these amazing curveballs. I try to not repeat as much as you already shared, and more or less actually take it to the next level. Let me quickly. Oh, shit. How do I do this? Can you guys see my screen?
Yep, it's all
yes.
good.
Yep.
It's in presenter mode now because I don't see you guys. Right?
Yeah, but we can see the screen now. Yeah.
So it's in presenter mode, right? Or not?
Yes, it is.
Okay, good. Hi everyone. I'm Alina Kadlubsky. I'm associate researcher at University of Applied Sciences, Mittweida, in the immersive technology department, and been part of the XR community and ecosystem for over 10 years. Thanks, Rob, for sharing and giving the opportunity for our audience to dive into this topic and the sort of emerging double-edged sword that technology has always been, which is getting sharper. So just to dive a bit deeper into this topic, where actually we start to see that virtual and the physical world are seamlessly starting to merge, which is more important in a way that we have content and filters that are starting to escape our 2D screens and starting to blend seamlessly with the physical world and our surroundings. So where we as a society, where this technology starts to sort of take over every aspect of our lives, I think, as you already touched upon, there are certain areas that we need to explore while this technology is still being developed. So, and also in a sense of acceptance, and also new concerns and challenges that are emerging out of the new technology by itself, especially when we start to augment the expression or even our social identity, especially in an era where which is more or less the internet in everything. So one aspect is our own selves, our surrounding, but then even every sort of physical object would in a sense become sort of intelligent and will start to learn from us, hence internet in everything, which also then starts to erase even more sort of potential challenges. What does that mean for us? What does that mean for our society? And what are potential consequences if we're not starting to also set the frameworks? These are ethical but also legal challenges, especially as we need to look at these technologies not in isolation as it's currently been done from a legal perspective, but also due to processes, but also technologies are starting to converge. There is more than meets the eye. So the visual aspect is one part of it, but what about if you include biometric IoT data? So there's even more that meets the eye that is beyond the visual aspect to these technologies. So in this context, what are potential emerging questions that we as users, but also on a broader level, society, legislators, educators, and also media literacies need to start to address? Especially since we are dealing with context-based technology. That means as we are leaving the 2D screens, we are dealing with content that is not static. Also, emerging questions to the right to augment, being augmented, how we and our surrounding is perceived. What are aspects? I mean, we see the change in political situation. So one can even argue it's one part to augment, but how does that also affect the physical surrounding? What about potential vandalism? What about digital vandalism? I mean, we just seen the Studio Ghibli filter, which is an IP to the studio. So what does that mean if someone takes over your 3D environment and hijacks that? So also about what is vandalism? How could that be maybe used as a tool when it comes to political scenarios, political perceives, political perspectives as well? cyber-physical technology make it feasible to alter, augment, or transform our surroundings? What are potential emerging consequences when it comes to perceptions of ourselves, others, en masse, but also the environment itself? And also including, I mean, there are amazing possibilities. I mean, what does it mean for learning? We've been reading books. Now you can actually travel back in time. So don't get me wrong, these technologies actually provide an immense of opportunity. I mean, the mind's the limits, and our physical surrounding becomes the sort of infinite canvas of perception. But as technology has always been, there's a double-edged sword, and the sword is getting sharper. So how does that actually affect our social identity? What does that mean for vulnerable people, such as kids, teenagers? What are the consequences? What are parameters? These are questions that while these technologies are being developed and starting to affect and influence our everyday lives, we need to address them now while it's being developed, why legislation is being adjusted, why we're establishing these frameworks, and also, address these needs. So we need to raise these questions regarding rights of individuals to augment and being augmented, perceived and being perceived. We need to provoke the needs for further multidisciplinary considerations. So also, at one extent, don't look at it in isolation. How important is interdisciplinary work? Technicians working with social scientists, ethicists, cross-disciplinary and industries. How important does that? At what extent also does that shape aspects like inclusion, accessibility, acceptance of the technology on a long-term level, especially since we're not dealing with static technologies. They are context-based, but when we are addressing static, that may also means in the context that digital content that we seamlessly start to blend with our surrounding could change over time. So also adding that time aspect is quite important to this. And what does that mean on how we perceive and also consume our surrounding, and also on a long-term basis, how does that sort of change our behavior? How does that affect society? Those parameters, we are still lacking long-term data. We also don't know how this affects our brains, as we all know with social media and digital technologies. It's a dopamine sort of drug. As we all know, big tech developed the technology how it is, just if you look at your screen time. So we now actually, as a society, have the abilities to start from a clean slate, but are we actually using that potential to our fullest? Especially since currently big tech is dominating, and they're not dominating it due to the hardware, which is the thing that perceives it, but it's really the convergence of technology. So in that context, there is a really interesting Stanford paper that was just published recently last week, which actually finds that AI models start lying when competing for human approval. And this is quite interesting, as we have perceived bullshit AI and hallucinations within AI, and AI XR technology is starting to visualize AI, and it's seamlessly becoming part of the production processes. But what in this paper was quite interesting, that actually while it's starting to compete for human approval, models became more pervasive, and also it became more misleading. So in the context, for instance, for simulation sales and performance, it improved by 6%, but the deceptive claims rose to 14%. So how this actually influenced then vote share increased, disinformation also in regards to election tasks, vote shares increased. So it's quite interesting, the drift towards misrepresentation and also how AI and social media posts introduce these sort of minor fractional errors, and also how this is changing, and also how AI and how these models are starting to compete for our approval. Yeah, if people are interested in this paper, here's a short link. Quickly leave that on for 2 minutes on the screen, so you have access, the ability to scan it. And this is quite interesting aspect. And in this context of this paper, when I was working through it, there are a couple of questions that actually popped up in my sense, in particular in the context of anthropomorphization and emerging challenges for our epistemic security. And also, I was then feeling, at what extent are we slowly starting to lose our critical thinking? As the more and more, and this is also when talking to professors in our domains, where they are starting that actually we are becoming really sort of lazy, but also are we also then losing our own sanity? So in that context, what about critical thinking? What about actually using our brains? And also in media literacy, what responsibility do we have that to the following generations when it comes to, you're so flooded with information, and now especially if that sort of starts to merge with the physical surrounding, how are you able to then actually seeing becomes believing, and at what extent are we even able to switch on our brains? So how does that affect our social identity? What does that mean to vulnerable people, but also kids? What does that mean for media literacy and the responsibility that it has, and that we as a society have to actually think critically and not just blindly trust? So yeah, in that extent, I've been really honored being part of a 3-year EU-funded research project called XR for Human. And in the context of epistemic risk, we actually done a mapping of emerging risks and harms, that actually novelty risks that emerge out of these technology. And we came up with actually 6 sort of cluster topics. And we sort of divided these sort of 6 major thematic categories with 19 sub-themes. I'm not diving deeper into this. All our deliverables are published under the Open Science Framework and are accessible through Zenodo.
And
In that
Alina,
context,
Alina, I'm sorry for the
yeah.
interruption. Like, if we can just like
I'm wrapping
so.
that up. So in that context, also we came up with the first universal code of conduct for human-centered and ethical development of immersive technologies. So I'm curious, at what extent can that be sort of applied to media literacy, and what role does media literacy sort of play together with XR technologies and the developers? And I guess Julian is diving more deeper into this topic. So yeah, thanks everyone.
Alina, thank you so much. And please, like, if you, I hope that you had the time to scan the QR code. And if not, I know that Shireen has posted the link on the chat. I am taking notes of all the questions on the chat, and the question part will be like at the very end. So thank you so much, Alina. It's a very comprehensive and informative like presentation, and we'll get back to you because we have a couple of questions related to what you have presented. So thank you so much. Now we are going to move to Kelsey, and Kelsey, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So my name is Kelsey. Hi. I am a media lawyer, and I was one of the first lawyers in the world to become peer-reviewed on the topic of deepfakes. I started paying attention to deepfakes and digital clones and replicas back in 2018, and I became peer-reviewed in 2019. I always say that I am not an AI lawyer who happens to be interested in this topic. I'm a failed creative. I wish I had half the courage that people like Rob do in terms of creating beautiful things and telling stories. I just happen to have a law degree, and I'm really passionate about film and media. And that's what brings me here today, because I'm a top expert in this really complex area. I also think it's quite interesting that in the survey that started out the session, people seem to be really focused on the practical implications and the ethical questions. Now, ethics, it's fun to explore, it's fun to ask these questions, and indeed the sophistication and elegance of the question, and nuance of the questions that both Rob and Alina raised, just give us an insight into how complex this area is. But what I always tell my clients is, I don't care about ethics. And what I mean by that is the law doesn't care about ethics. I think we all know that there are many things that are completely ethical, which are not legal. And indeed, the law permits things that are not ethical to go forward. So my job is actually to make sense of what is really, really complicated from a practical perspective, while also bearing in mind the challenges that we see with ethics. So I'm not going to bore you with legislation or case law or lawsuits or anything like that today. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through my process so that you can kind of see why this is such a complicated thing to resolve from a legal perspective. So I kind of started out with this basic premise. You know, Rob's question about imagining a classroom in which different students are seeing different things. Let's think about it very simply. There's a classroom. Every student sees the same blackboard, but not the same thing written on it. And I realized this is what the law has been trying to figure out for hundreds, if not thousands of years, right? We are always dealing with competing versions of the truth, whether it's an argument in a criminal case or a contract that needs to come together with different people from different sides of the aisle trying to make a deal work, right? The difference of, not to say nothing of freedom of expression and fiction and so on, the issue that we have with AI is it goes from just imagining someone in a particular way to now actually seeing them in a particular way. So I was thinking about this and I thought, well, what the hell does a lawyer's job even look like? What are we trying to do with this complicated legal jargon and tiny, tiny fine print? And I distilled it into three kind of distinct areas. Now, this is my personal framework. It's not set in stone. A different lawyer will have a different view. But for me, I kind of focused on three key areas. We need to define reality. We need to figure out a way so that people, everyday people, understand what they are seeing and whether or not it's a projection. I mean that both literally and figuratively, or whether it's something that multiple people can experience and see at the same time, right? It's like knowing when you walk into a cinema that you might see something that's CGI, right? There are no labels or disclaimers. We just kind of know that the rocket ships don't move that way, right? So we need to define reality, and we do this through different ways: evidence, authenticity, providence, that sort of thing. But we have to be flexible, right? To allow for creativity and fiction and so on. We also need to protect autonomy. Now, this is, for me, it's typically the person whose identity or image is being manipulated, and we do that through mechanisms like consent and control and privacy and notices and things of that nature. And then this is where we kind of get into ethics as well. It's balancing power. I could talk all day about Elon Musk and his friends, but for our purposes here today, this is really considering the systemic or structural implications about those tech companies or tech vendors or institutions that have the power to indeed reframe our reality, right? So define it, protect autonomy, balance power. This is kind of what I think we're trying to do. And this is how we get there. This is how lawyers in this area work, or at least it's how I work. I think about the objectives, Okay. For those of you in education, you want to educate your students, obviously. You want to engage them. You want to inspire them. You want to leave some sort of lasting impact. Perhaps it's a climate change awareness module that you're doing, and you want them to put on a headset and see the, flood waters rising and coming up into the classroom, okay? You also want to maintain cohesive standards, whether that's from a regulatory perspective, school-wide, district-wide, whatever. And then you try to achieve those objectives, and these are the types of tech. So this is where Rob's and other technologists kind of come in. You do it through storytelling and overlays and virtual reality tours. So you've got the objectives, and then you've got the tools, right? This is where it gets really complicated. So many of these things deal with so many different legal areas. Straight away, the patented technology, right? You have to think about patent and state of the art. You have to think about copyrights in the text for the stories that you're telling, copyrights in the actual photography that you're animating, to say nothing of the fact that you have to think about liability and safeguarding and freedom of expression, and the list goes on and on. And for each of these legal areas, we derive the information from different types of instruments: statute, legislation, case law, contracts, codes, advocacy groups. So in reality, when I say that my job's really complicated, I'm not just trying to gatekeep or to sound clever. I'm just saying it's really complex when we try to fit things in. So when your lawyer tells you it depends, it really does depend. And I think this is really important to emphasize because it's a complicated area. I'm going to be sharing, I've got the link for this, but I just wanted to really emphasize the fact that identity, character, persona, all of these things have had kind of a theatrical edge to them. And how we present ourselves is just one part of the puzzle. We also have to think about our own emotions, our own psychology, and so on. So when we have these different themes like consent, bias, representation, surveillance, and so on, there are different legal questions and different classroom implications. I am kind of rushing through this because I'm very aware of time and I want to make sure everyone has a chance. But one of the things I recently did is one of my clients actually went on to become the voice of Grok, which is one of X's chatbots. And I thought this would be a good example to kind of end with, because it wasn't just the contract and the regulations. It wasn't just the fine print that I had to make sure I was on top of. Bearing in mind that this actor's voice could be used in a certain way, powered by AI, and creating kind of this immersive correspondence with listeners. We also had to look at regulations. And again, that's just a small part of the puzzle. We also have to look at the specific nuances, the platform risks, as well as the industry moods and the social implications. So again, if there's one thing to kind of take away from all of this, it's that it's important to have principles for how you want the law to work and for how you want the ecosystem to thrive. But it's only when you understand your practical goals, so those objectives and the tools that you're using, and then match them to the practicalities of your day to day, then you can draw on the legals. And that's my job, is helping figure out what they want to do with the technology and do so in a responsible way that hopefully sets a good standard and a good example for things moving forward. You can connect with me. I'm unfortunately back on Twitter just because my job necessitates it. So sorry, X, whatever. And that's the QR code that takes you to my information.
Great, Kelsey. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And I have this pressing question, but I'm going to keep it till the end. Pressing question for you. But thank you so much. That was also informative. Now we will move to Julian, and Julian will link the entire thing to education. Julian, yes, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Are you seeing full screen?
Yes.
Right. So I'm trying to do this fairly quickly, but it's a pretty huge topic. So please understand that it would be good to have like 3 days. But I'll try and do it in about five to 10 minutes. Right. So just want to kind of frame this in terms of I've been making notes throughout from the previous speakers, and I'm going to try and adapt what I say to some of their kind of provocations and helpful comments. But The reason why this short presentation is called Hunslet and Hal, not from Hunslet to Hal, is for this reason. So in 1957, Richard Hoggart writes The Uses of Literacy, and he's in a place called Hunslet, which is near Leeds in the north of England. And he writes this book about what happens when new literacy opportunities are afforded to everyday people. In his words, the working class. He defines himself as that. What happens and what he observes in this kind of ethnography of his own experience is that, of course, literacy affords people with new forms of social mobility, education, employability, civic opportunities, but it also creates opportunities for people to be audiences and markets. So, of course, to be monetized, to be persuaded, to be manipulated. So I want us just to think about the fact that he writes this in 1957 in the north of England, in Hunslet, and he's writing about television, and he's writing about magazines, and he's writing about jazz music. Okay, but I think the questions that he poses are identical. I would go as far as to say identical as the questions that we're posing today. And if we look at Rob's work and the other speakers and all of the fascinating kind of theoretical and philosophical questions that have come forward, and I'm using Hal to reference the the famous moment in 2001 when you can't get back into the spaceship, right? Because the AI has developed its own kind of reasoning to some extent. And the questions are the same, I think. So from Richard Hoggart in 1957 to Rob Morgan today and other speakers as well, we're dealing with these same questions. And the frustration then is that I can't offer any solutions in media literacy. And in fact, I'm passionately opposed to the idea of offering solutions in media literacy because that's not what literacy is about, as I'll try and explain. So we can distinguish between static and dynamic notions of literacy. On the left-hand side, you'll see some definitions of static literacy. And unfortunately, the education system mobilizes a static version. Wrong term to use, mobilize, of course, for static. It positions literacy as static. And what that means is that we strive to understand literacy in and of itself as something that confers status and success. You either have literacy or you don't. It's a kind of binary deficit model. You have high levels of literacy, you have lower levels of literacy, as though literacy is this kind of fixed static thing we can understand, as though it's not always evolving and dynamic and in play. We want to think that literacy has kind of meanings that are fixed and discoverable by learning codes and conventions. So how are we as higher education practitioners going to teach literacy for XR, for example? But it also always comes back to this notion that texts are primarily still printed. Literacy is about kind of oral and print culture. And so we talk about all these other various literacies. There's a new literacy every day, right? Every week. There's visual, multimodal, game literacy, data literacy, media literacy, health literacy, AI literacy, XR literacy, VR literacy, on and on. And what that does with really good intentions is it kind of makes us think all the time that these new forms of literacy are annexed to the core business of literacy, which is still about reading and writing in very kind of traditional, conventional ways. Alternatively, we can see literacy as dynamic, whereby it's always ideological and contested. And the entire discussion today is a discussion about ideology and conflicted and contested ideas about what literacy is and what we need for these evolving and shifting patterns of kind of human conditionality. So meaning in the dynamic sense for literacy is negotiated and contingent, socio-material, more than human, always more than human, even back to the printing press. And texts, therefore, are all around us in the many practices in which people and machines engage to make meaning in many modes. And the notes I made from Rob earlier and other speakers as well, are all about this notion of the right to augment, the right to put limits on the augmentation of yourself by others, right? Ways in which we're going to have rights over ourselves as media, referencing McLuhan. So these fascinating dynamic shifts in people, machines, meaning, media, I argue have always been at the heart of literacy if we think about it as dynamic. And therefore we can say in the end that literacies have their own codes and conventions which work together to produce meaning. So in other words, to be literate means to understand reflexively what you think literacy is for itself. And you'll notice nothing on that screen says media literacy. Like this is a distinction between static and dynamic conceptions of literacy per se. My argument is that media literacy should always already be understood as dynamic. Which means that when we turn to things like AI literacy, XR literacy, these are, augmentation literacy. We've got many examples, but I just want to pause for a minute on the emerging, and it really is emerging. There's hundreds and hundreds of AI literacy frameworks and models, you know, emerging every single day, and that's obviously a good thing. No one's arguing for less literacy, and no one's arguing for less attention to literacy. But what we tend to do is we want to fix it, right? What do we need? What literacies do we need, everybody, for this thing that's happening, and how do we frame that in this way? So I prefer to think about literacy in terms of values, and this is a good example, and the link will be in the chat to this one, which is created by Doug Belshaw and BBC Innovation Centre. I think I contributed to a panel where we started to kind of work on framing this. So you've got words like agency and empowerment, equality, diversity and inclusion, critical thinking, of course, responsible use, rights and well-being, creativity and participation. So very dynamic notions of embedding values in action. So literacy, praxis with an X, going back to the kind of Paulo Freire way of thinking about literacy in that sense. And then trying to think about, what do we want this literacy to be for? What do we want the uses of these literacies to be? Again, back to Richard Hoggart, 1957. So I'm making notes and highlighting things people have talked about on the panel. So the need to balance power from Kelsey, the right to augment from Alina, Rob talking about our rights over ourselves as media. All of these things pose questions for media literacy, but they also insert and foreground values and reflexive thinking about literacy as we move forward. So this is a slide that I prepared earlier before the talk, and the blue highlighted text is what I've added during the previous speakers' presentations, so I could try and understand for myself as I'm moving through how these things work. And I've been doing a lot of work in the last few years on a theory of change for media literacy, and there'll be a link in the chat to the website for that. It's been quite a big part of my life for the last few years. And what I've done is I've mapped 400 media literacy projects from all over the world from the last 10 years or so, mainly to this theory of change, to try to actually quantify and qualify the difference media literacy makes to people's lives. And this theory of change has 4 elements: access, awareness, capability, and consequences. So before today, I tried to map across how we could think about the uses of media literacy in general, the uses of media literacy for XR, and then the uses of XR for media literacy. In other words, what does XR do to media literacy as a concept? So it's in that dynamic interplay all the time. And you can see on the screen, I'm not going to read them all out in the interest of time, we've got lots of kind of criteria for how media literacy can work in response to and for XR, and then on the other side of the coin, how XR makes a difference. And you can see in the text there that the phrasing is always active, always dynamic, always about how literacy is a kind of reflexive understanding of the conditions of one's own possibility as a human, right, in and through media. There is a shift, of course. Previously, you know, going back to McLuhan, we could think about media and ourselves as separate entities to some extent. We had mediated lives that we could identify what media were. Now, I think Rob makes the fascinating point that, you know, we are pieces of media ourselves, and other people will create those with or without our consent, and that does change things. You know, we are the medium is the message, etc. So just to conclude, the things I've highlighted for today are, in the access domain, what would the uses of literacy for XR involve? Linking to our previous speak as well, people have talked about privacy and equality, rights to XR inclusion and access, and then this notion really of kind of governance, right? What's the access to our mediated selves for others? Do we have any control over that? Possibly not, but then understanding a lack of control, right, is part of an access. We could talk about known unknowns if we wanted to in that space. And then really in the awareness space, always literacy has that dimension. And this is really a kind of meta awareness of our rights over ourselves as media. And that's the most prominent thing that came out of the talks here today. Now, capabilities, when you use your literacy for things in your life, and what I always really want to say is that we're wrong if we believe that literacy in and of itself leads to positive capabilities. I suggest the evidence is overwhelmingly to the contrary, right? People are not using media literacy for social good in the main. And if we want them to, then we have to make sure we have a model of literacy that has values, and those values of a positive, healthier media ecosystem in the future. So
Julian,
exercise,
I have a question, like, because only we have like 4 minutes for questions and answers, but I have a question, like, does this like chart, is it shareable? Like, can it be like shared with?
yeah, the slides are
Okay.
shareable, but I will
Oh,
share this
perfect.
version because I've produced it in real time now. I need 10 seconds to say, if you look at the bottom of the slide, and it really is important I say this, the consequences can be that we use media literacy to balance power, going back to Kelsey's points for ecosystem health. But I also think we need to understand that it could be the case that XR takes us to the limits of literacy, and that this may be beyond what media literacy can help us with. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Julian. So like there were like so many questions and discussions going on in the chat, and I'm really thankful to all the presenters today. That was a very helpful and really informative topic. I have a question, and please like feel free to jump in. Like the questions started when Rob started his presentation, but I feel like they are related to all of you. So it's about like John Walker, like he started this, which is about like the idea of reality, and then Joris, and I apologize if my pronunciation of the names is not correct, like mentioned that does objective reality exist? So my question here is, yes, does objective reality exist? So what is wrong, like Rob, if I perceived someone as whatever? And the other thing is, because this is maybe the way that I perceive it in my mind, but now the only difference is I added a visual to it, right? So that's the question. Does objective reality exist? And specifically also for Kelsey, if a third party has an access to this, so is there anything wrong about it? Especially if when I sign up for any platform or anything, and I say like agree, most likely without reading all these like fine line things. So let's do this. Like let's start with Rob, Alina, and Julian. Like does objective reality exist?
So I think it's a very fair point. I responded to John further up in the chat because if you get a philosopher drunk, they will agree like we have always lived in very subjective worlds, that none of this is strictly speaking new, and that none of us have ever been able to guarantee how we appear to one another, right? But I think that what I'm talking about is XR exacerbating the effect of things that we're already seeing on the internet, because those things are going to move off flat screens and phones and out onto the street, as Alina says. So we have always, for example, been able to choose to read different newspapers with different ideological bents, or at least for, like as long as the press has really existed. We've been able to choose to curate our own news. But what we've seen over the last 2 decades on the internet is that tendency towards being able to personalize information, the information that you receive, has expanded to the point that people tend to exist in curated filter bubbles where an algorithm is selecting content that is most likely to be suited to them, which tends to be stuff that they already agree with ideologically or politically, right? And we've seen the impact of that in terms of radicalization and in terms of extremism and the rise of conspiracy theories and fascism in the States, in particular, driven by conspiracy theories in so many ways. We're living in that post-truth society already. If you can take that tendency that has already prompted significant historical and political activity just from words on your mobile phone in your pocket about conspiracies and Pizzagate and so forth, imagine then being able to pervasively exist within a world which visualizes your ideological perspective in a noticeable and pervasive way in the world around you. And that could be very simple things, from being able to identify somebody's demographic and then being able to superimpose information above their head. We've already seen that the previous generation of Meta Ray-Bans were able to dox people on site by using facial recognition to scrape the internet for data about them and then feed the wearer of the glasses information about the person that they were looking at. So if you can get someone's name from a facial recognition using cameras, glasses with a front-facing camera, you can probably also infer their likely voting preference. And you might then be able to, for example, superimpose a political ideological color onto them, or just visualize all Republicans as trolls. So I think it's just an expansion of the extent to which we all tend to choose to live within customized realities already and always have. But I think that is a tendency which can lead humans to do very violent and non-empathetic things. And I do think that effect will be exacerbated by this technology to a certain extent.
Makes sense. And Kelsey, like about the third party thing. Now, if as a user I give consent, so what is wrong with that?
Well, I mean, the answer is very unsexy. It's literally just what does the contract say and what type of data are you giving? So for me, if I was adjusting this, I would basically just look at the vendor, the provider of the technology, and what it is that they're able to guarantee or warrant or provide in terms of IT security. And then I would also look at the customer. So the customer in this case would be a educational organization who will, of course, have their students and staff and others at the forefront of their minds in order to protect. And then we would basically say, look, if we were going to have this type of technology in the classroom, we want to ensure that the gesticulations or the emotions of students isn't going to then be sucked up into the cloud and then used for some nefarious purpose. And then my job would basically be go in with a scalpel or a sledgehammer and adjust the wording so that it fits that. This is a good place to say that until the law, the statutory regulations, until they catch up, we have to rely on contracts. And actually, I'm a contract negotiator. I'm always going to say contracts are the way to go because they allow for nuance and flexibility. And for example, one organization may be totally cool with their students' data being used in a certain way, another might not be. So if you have a flat regulation, that's a great starting point, but then use contracts to push and pull those levers and get something that works for you specifically.
Perfect. And a follow-up question, like there is a massive number of research papers about like ethical framework for using AI/XR. So in your opinion, should we start with an ethical framework and then law should follow these ethical frameworks, or it's the other way around? Like we as researchers, we need to wait for the law first and then we like draft our ethical framework.
Don't wait for the law first. I don't know if everybody would agree with that. But basically, look, FOMO is not a strategy. You need to understand yourself, and this is where it gets ethical. You need to understand yourself, your objectives, how you move and operate in society. And once you have those values, those core truths for you, whether it's things like privacy or exploration or creativity, whatever, then you talk to a lawyer and they can adjust the contract to meet what you need. Don't just sit, it's too complex. It's too complex. If you want to have a law that covers every single, permutation of how this technology can be used, it will be 10,000 million pages long. Don't wait for the regulators in Brussels. Sorry, I'm huge. I did a master's in EU law. I talked to you all day about the respect that I have for the European Parliament, etc. Don't wait for the regulators in Brussels to figure out what's going on because they also have to pay attention to the big tech companies. Yes, they do. They'll hate to admit that, but they do. You can set the rules yourself. Use a lawyer who gets your industry, who gets your objectives, and have the contract. And through this kind of collaboration, we can shape the future that we want.
Okay, perfect. So like this is inspired by like John Walker's your question, like the question in the chat, which is like about if you want to design something and for students. But I like the way that you concluded your answer. That's John, like you're gonna set your rules, and also I can confirm based on that answer that researchers are doing a good job, like focusing on the ethical part without waiting for the legal perspective. Elena, that's a question, and just I promise that's gonna be like in 1 or 2 minutes. So Elena, about the critical thinking part, and also I think like Julian would be one of a good fit for this question. The critical thinking part, don't you think like it's a broad thing? It's a very broad term.
No, because I think it's also in a sense that when you look at interoperability and also think of cross technology, but also cross domains. So for instance, just to follow up what Kelsey said, within our project, we've also done a legal gap analysis. So that's the other part is I think here various domains need to work together because otherwise you are in silos. And we need to start bursting bubbles, not just only from a legal perspective, but also by start having diverse teams that actually look at the sort of human-driven aspect of it, because we need technology for humans, but also with a human in the loop. So I think also maybe we need to perceive and also challenge. So when it comes to the legal gap analysis, currently, and also challenged, because there's still a huge issue on how, for instance, the AI Act is applied. So also don't look at these sort of legislations as set in stone. Also challenge them, because there are also huge question marks and how these can be applied. And just based on the legal gap analysis and how GDPR and other legal existing regulations apply to XR, is still, there's a huge gray area. And this is also, from a legal perspective, not 100% covered. And this is also where big tech ties into these gray areas, because there's no black and white. I think this is really important.
Perfect. I want to conclude with Julian's, like your last comment here in the chat, like linking this to like the pedagogy of the oppressed. So like I want to talk here more like with your optimistic way of seeing this point.
Yeah, so I just typing stuff in the chat because I ran out of time to say it. But yeah, I just think that it's so complex, but some of this is beyond literacy, right? Because it's law, and it's and I think we need to avoid that kind of neoliberal thing where we just say that, you know, the answer to everything is teachers and schools and higher education and literacy, right? And do nothing about the kind of toxicity of the thing. That's been an age-old issue. But I think this is different, and all of the previous speakers are kind of more expert than me in articulating the difference. But it does take us back to that notion of literacy that's about more than just functional skills and knowledge. It has to, and then there's a positive outcome there, because I think those of us that are distinguishing between those static and dynamic models can now see that it's impossible to do mid-literacy for and with XR without having that kind of dynamic notion of literacy of the self, you know, to take us right back to where we started with Rob earlier. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all of you. And Monica, now the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much for all of you for taking the time, and apologies to the ones that are still online that we went a little bit over time, but this is a hot topic, and we would want to continue these conversations. And I also would like you to invite, I want to invite you to continue these conversations by either contacting the speakers or joining the special interest groups. So if there's anything really interesting that you want to dive into, we can share them with everybody. Then also some dates maybe that you would like to attend other webinars. We will do our best to stick to the time, but they're up on the screen here. Otherwise, go to our website. And then one I do want to highlight is the Media and Learning Conference, which is next year on the 17th and 18th of June. We have the call open for proposals. So if anybody wants to come as a keynote speaker or do a workshop or whatever it is that you're working on, there are a couple of themes that we have there. Do have a look at it, promote it, and I hope that you will be able to come to this in-person event in Leuven next year. And yeah, there's the special interest groups. So these are the ones that focus on different topics. If you're interested in them, you can just sign up there and say which ones you're interested in. And those are the ones that we ask people to mainly keep really open, not presentations or anything like that, but just really chat and share ideas and anything you've come across. So that is our special interest group. And then last one is the newsletter. If you want to you want an article published, or you want to report some news or something like that you think our members would find useful, you can submit your content for the newsletters each month. So please remember that that's out there as well. Thanks, Andre, for accepting my apology. And yeah, that's it. Thank you so very, very much to all